Most people look at a haute couture dress and think, it's just luxury, pure pretension. But what almost no one knows is that behind each piece lies an uncomfortable and even somewhat shocking truth that the world doesn't like to discuss. The controversy begins precisely when we realize that such a dress doesn't cost much. It costs logical. But this logic has nothing to do with money, but rather with something much deeper: tradition, rarity, and a type of art that is disappearing before our very eyes. And that's where the paradox lies. While many complain about the prices, the people who actually buy couture would pay even more. Not because they are rich, but because they understand what most have never seen. There is a secret world within fashion where time moves differently, where ancient techniques challenge modern technology, and where each embroidered stitch carries a piece of human history. Entering this world is like opening the door to a cultural vault that few have access to. Therefore, before judging the price, it's worth asking a simple question: what are we really buying when we buy a couture dress? For some, the answer seems obvious. For others, this question becomes a kind of revelation, because what the world sees is only the surface. And honestly, when you discover the hidden layers behind this universe, you'll understand why these dresses cost what they cost, and why perhaps the true price isn't even in the final value. What does haute couture really mean, and why only 1% understand it? There's something almost magical when someone hears the expression, haute couture, but few truly understand the weight that name carries. It's like observing an imposing castle without imagining the underground tunnels that support it. Haute couture isn't simply high fashion. It's an institution protected by strict rules, almost like a secret club open only to the chosen few. To belong to this universe, a fashion house must demonstrate artisanal excellence, monitored. It's as if the industry were saying, if you want to enter, follow the rules, or go back to prêt-à-porter. This requirement creates a sense of rarity that the general public can barely perceive. And when we talk about rarity, we also talk about responsibility. What few people know is that, to produce couture, brands need to keep an entire atelier running year-round, even if they only sell a few pieces per season. It's like having an orchestra at your disposal, ready to play, even if there's only a concert twice a year. This commitment explains why only a handful of maisons manage to maintain this level, and of course, opens the door to another, even more fascinating secret, the one that resides in the quiet hours of work that no one sees. The invisible working hours, embroidery, draping, and artisans who are disappearing. When someone looks at a couture dress, they hardly realize that, before each sparkle, there was an almost unimaginable amount of manual labor. Many of these dresses take 600 to 1,000 hours to complete. Some exceed 4,000. Imagine dedicating entire months to embroidering the same piece, stitch by stitch, as if drawing one's own patience. That's why, to understand the price of couture, one must first see the time, that silent ingredient that doesn't appear on the catwalks. The world of couture also harbors a rare figure: the artisans. These people master ancestral techniques of embroidery, pleating, draping, and appliqué that are no longer taught in schools. In some ateliers, lissage embroidery is treated as a living treasure, and rightly so. They are like the masters of ancient samurai swords. If one of them retires and no one learns what he knows, the technique disappears forever. And this is already happening, because fewer and fewer young people want to pursue such meticulous, almost monastic work. Perhaps that's why each couture dress carries a certain melancholy, as if it were a reminder that we are seeing the last guardians of a craft that the modern world doesn't have time to learn. These aged hands know secrets that no machine can replicate, and that's precisely where another intriguing question begins to arise. If the workforce is disappearing, what happens to the materials that only these artisans know how to handle? Materials bordering on the absurd, crystals, gold threads, fabrics impossible to find. Few people imagine that, behind the scenes of haute couture, there exists a universe of materials that seem to have come from a treasure chest. It's no exaggeration. Some dresses use custom-made Swarovski crystals, pearls cultivated especially for the collection, and even hand-braided gold threads. For some fabrics, such as certain types of pure silk velvet, a single meter can cost more than a month's rent in expensive neighborhoods of São Paulo. It is at this point that the cost ceases to be logical and becomes almost poetic. And it doesn't stop there. There are French laces that can only be produced on centuries-old machines operating in a single village in the French countryside. There are fabrics so rare that they are kept in climate-controlled vaults, as if they were works of art waiting for the right moment to be born. Remember those old tales where kings traveled far to find a unique fabric? In couture, this still happens. Only now the search is carried out by creative directors and luxury buyers, with international flights and expensive coffees in hand. The most curious thing is that many of these materials only reveal their full beauty after being worked on by the right artisans. A crystal may seem ordinary to anyone, but it comes to life when embroidered with techniques that allow the light to dance upon it. And it is precisely in this encounter between the impossible material and the skilled hand that the magic of couture is born. But this magic has an even higher price when we remember what keeps it all running, year after year. The cost of running a couture atelier, and why most brands have shied away from it. Keeping a haute couture atelier open is almost like supporting an entire city that lives exclusively to create art. Every seamstress, pattern maker, embroiderer, and apprentice needs to be there every day, even when there are no dresses being sold. It's like having a restaurant with award-winning chefs operating 24 hours a day, even if there are only customers on 2 specific nights of the year. The payroll alone for a couture atelier would make many entrepreneurs give up before the first fashion show. Furthermore, there is the silent pressure of tradition. Couture ateliers cannot simply outsource processes or replace experienced hands with modern machines. They need to preserve techniques that come from decades, sometimes centuries, keeping alive routines that make no economic sense. Imagine training someone for 8 years just to master a specific type of embroidery stitch. Few brands are willing to make that kind of compromise in today's fast-paced world. Perhaps that's why so many fashion houses have abandoned the couture label over the years, migrating solely to commercial lines that generate immediate profit. The cost is so exorbitant that only the most resilient, stubborn, and passionate houses insist on remaining. And it is precisely this insistence that creates another fascinating paradox. If keeping the atelier alive already costs a fortune, what about the grand presentations that need to be made to showcase these pieces? To the world? Fashion shows that cost millions to sell very few items. Haute couture fashion shows are true spectacles bordering on the unreal. Many people watch those grandiose runways and think it's all just glamour. But what they don't realize is that each minute of the show can cost thousands of dollars. Renting a historic location, hiring renowned models, illuminating every inch of the space, and supporting a giant technical team transforms the event into a cinematic production. And all this happens to present collections that often have minuscule print runs. There's a delightful paradox in this universe. Most people think fashion shows exist to sell dresses, when in reality they're more about positioning. It's as if the fashion house is saying to the world, "Look at the level of what we are capable of doing." Direct profit rarely comes from there. What pays the bills is the impact, the prestige, and the desire that the brand creates in elite clients. A couture show functions almost like a political statement within fashion. Power, heritage, technique, and audacity. Even knowing that few pieces will be sold, the fashion houses continue to invest heavily, as if they understand that some traditions cannot be broken. The fashion shows are the showcase that keeps the house's name alive, fueling dreams, headlines, and of course, the imagination of the clients. But while the public thrills to the spectacle, there is an even more intriguing detail. Who are these women who actually buy couture? And why does almost no one know their names? Clients who don't appear in the media, princesses, billionaires, and anonymous collectors. The public often imagines that those who buy haute couture dresses are celebrities who appear on the red carpet. But, in reality, these women are almost never the actual clients. Most couture pieces are acquired by discreet princesses, billionaires who don't have social media, and collectors who treat dresses as works of art. They are women who prefer invisibility to the spotlight, and perhaps that is precisely what makes them even more fascinating in the eyes of the fashion houses. These clients aren't just buying a dress, they're buying an entire experience. Many arrive at the ateliers in private jets, bringing style advisors and spending hours discussing color, fabric, and the history of the garment. It's an almost intimate relationship, like that of an artist with their patron during the Renaissance. Some of them buy every year, and, curiously, many of these dresses will never be worn in public. They are kept in climate-controlled rooms like family treasures. And although they live far from the media spotlight, their decisions influence the course of fashion more than any celebrity posing for photos. When one of these clients orders something unusual, like a structured dress inspired by Islamic architecture, the entire atelier adjusts its creative language to fulfill that desire. And it is precisely in this extreme personalization that another charming curiosity arises. The dress the client sees on the runway is almost never the dress she actually takes home. The dress you buy, and the dress you actually receive. A little-known fact is that the dress shown on the runway is just an idea, almost a first version of what the client will actually receive. In couture, nothing is ready-made. Everything is constructed from the person's body. This means that the original design can change completely. Color, neckline, volume, embroidery. Everything is negotiated. It's as if the runway were a menu, but the final meal is made entirely to measure. When a client chooses a dress, she begins a journey that involves several in-person fittings. The atelier creates a mold of her body with almost surgical precision. Then comes the toils phase, test versions made of raw cotton, which are adjusted with millimeter precision. It's such a detailed process that it resembles Japanese artisans who spend years perfecting the perfect curve of a ceramic piece. With each meeting, the garment gets closer to the final vision and to the client's personality. After weeks, sometimes months, the dress that emerges is completely unique, very different from the one the world saw on the catwalk. It's almost as if the garment has two lives, a public one and a private one. And it is precisely in this metamorphosis that the emotional value of couture is consolidated, paving the way for an even deeper part of this story. The psychological aspect that makes these women invest fortunes in something that, in the end, says much more about who they are than about the fabric itself. The psychological factor, exclusivity, power, and elite identity. The truth is, when you buy haute couture, you're not just acquiring a dress, you're acquiring a feeling. Exclusivity is one of the most coveted currencies among people who already have everything, and couture acts as a kind of invisible password that separates those who can from those who only observe. It's like entering a room where only half a dozen people in the world have ever set foot. This experience awakens a profound feeling of power, not arrogant power, but that silent power that only those who experience it perceive. Beyond exclusivity, there's the emotional impact. Many clients describe the moment they put on a couture piece as if they were entering a higher version of themselves. It's similar to the feeling of putting on a perfect suit for the first time only multiplied by 100. For some, the dress represents personal achievements, a deal closed, a wedding, an intimate victory. For others, it's simply a way of saying to themselves, I can. And honestly, there's no psychologist in the world who doesn't understand the symbolic weight of that. But the most fascinating point is that couture becomes almost an extension of these women's identity. They don't buy fashion. They buy belonging to an invisible and extremely select club. Every detail of the garment reaffirms something about who they are and who they chose to be. And when we understand this psychological layer, it becomes much clearer how the final value of a dress can reach figures that seem impossible, until we discover how this equation is actually calculated. The ultimate cost: why a dress can reach you $500,000 or more. When we put together each piece of this puzzle, rare artisans, almost mythical materials, months of manual labor, ateliers that function like true art academies, we begin to realize that the price of a couture dress is less about being expensive and more about being complex. It's not just the fabric, it's not just the embroidery. It's the sum of hundreds of micro-decisions made by masters who have dedicated their entire lives to this craft. Each hour worked, there is worth the same as sessions with top-level specialists in any field. Then comes the invisible structure: renting spaces for fittings, preserving historical archives, climate control for sensitive materials, constant training of new talent, in addition to the fashion shows that cost millions and serve more to keep the flame of the maison alive than to sell pieces directly. It's like financing a symphony orchestra that plays only for a tiny audience, and even then, ensuring that every instrument is in tune every day. This math never adds up logically, only emotionally. And then there's the symbolic value, perhaps the most immeasurable part of this equation. A couture dress is not just a dress. It's a portable work of art, tangible proof that the impossible still exists. It carries history, technique, tradition, identity, and emotion. And when we add all that up, the price of you $500,000, which seems absurd at first glance, begins to make sense. But it's in the next point that we discover the deepest reason of all: what the world doesn't see, but which transforms these pieces into cultural legacies. What the world doesn't see: the symbolism, legacy, and cultural impact behind each piece of sewing. Behind every couture dress lies a story that rarely reaches the public. It represents not only the taste of a client, but the vision of a creative director, the memory of an entire atelier, and sometimes even the rescue of techniques that were on the verge of disappearing. It's as if each piece carries within it a miniature museum, where tradition and modernity coexist. Many of these dresses end up becoming academic references, studied and photographed for decades. Furthermore, a couture dress has the power to define eras. Think of the iconic looks that changed the public's perception of beauty, femininity, and power. Almost all of them came from couture. These are pieces that shape culture, influence generations, and inspire new languages within fashion. That's why museums like the Met, the Victoria and Albert, and the Palais Galliera compete to acquire or exhibit these works. They are not clothes, they are artistic statements, and perhaps the most beautiful part is that, even costing small fortunes, these dresses leave a cultural trail far greater than their price. They tell stories about who we are and what we value as a society. And when we look closely, we realize that couture not only keeps up with the times, it records them, provokes them, and often transforms them. Now that we understand this impact, it becomes even clearer why the world rarely sees the truth behind these dresses, and why that truth deserves to be told. After understanding the world of haute couture from the inside, it becomes almost impossible to look at a dress the same way, because now you know it's not about cost, but about invisible layers of history, technique, sweat, and symbols that transcend generations. And the question that remains is simple, but unsettling. What have you built in your own life that carries that same level of purpose? What are you creating that lasts, that has identity, that represents who you truly are? Perhaps this video reminded you that value isn't measured in numbers, but in depth. And if that resonated with you, it's worth looking at your daily choices and asking yourself, have I been investing in what truly matters? Or am I living on autopilot, accepting ready-made versions of my own story? The beauty of couture isn't in the glitz, but in the time dedicated to creating something unique, and that applies to dresses and to people. What part of your life are you willing to reshape with the same care? If this content has sparked new ideas, new questions, or even a new perspective on the world, then here's an invitation. Keep walking with me. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and let's delve deeper into this fascinating universe together, where nothing is superficial and everything has a hidden meaning waiting to be discovered.